The chorus goes, there's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine, yes, it's mine. I've met the author of my story, and he's mine, yes, he's mine. After Paul and Peter met and talked with the author of their stories, they were given a new name. Their old one didn't fit the call God had for them. It's interesting how the church is okay with this, but not always when people willingly decide to change their names, maybe claiming that it's not who they are or something along those lines. Because, of course they know that person better than they know themselves. That's totally how it works, right? In any case, names and assignments within one's calling are fluid. Just as we may have to adjust something we're doing to better carry out God's work for us, we may have to also change our name. Some people, like I mentioned a little bit ago, may have issues with your changes. Calling myself out for this again. Sometimes it's hard for people to let go of their perceptions or ideas of you and see you fully as you are. But that's on them. If you're at peace with the name you've chosen and don't feel convicted, but rather convinced that this is what you're supposed to do, then hold on to that. It's easier said than done, but know that above all else, God, the author of your story, affirms you, and you are precious to them. And Sanctuary is here to affirm you too.
Where you have there convinced, and the recovery text we say being convinced, we're ready to take certain steps.
So good.
Dropping truth bombs out here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add when we were talking about what was it, Abram, and at the beginning of this sermon we were talking about how there's a glove on the road that can get dirty and still pick it up and have its purpose. So imagine this: you're 99 years old, you fall on the floor, you've got a wife's housemaid that's now a baby mama, and
Wow.
I mean, you're just chilling on the ground like life is pain, and like God comes out of nowhere and he's like, oh, by the way, you're gonna have another kid now, and you start laughing at God, and then like God's just looking at you and he's like, you dropped your crown, king, and he hands it to you, and it's like, oh, but that's not my name. God's like, who's laughing now?
About that.
He's still gonna find you and know where you are.
I know.
No matter what your name is.
Yeah. That's good.
So, I'm going last. I'm going to rethink this next time.
What do you mean?
Because you get up there and you do the whole thing on names and where they all came from, and that was all in my message. And y'all took the easy ones. I have to go find people. Okay, next time I'm going first. Okay.
Okay, go for it.
I'm telling you all. Next time I'm telling you all. This is who I picked. Okay.
Also go first.
Yeah, right. Well, but the last shall be first.
Oh.
But-
For namesake.
But no, you all did really good. Y'all did really, really good. And so my message is what's in a name. And I'm actually coming from two passages. So anybody who has a Bible, let's go over to Genesis 32 for the first one. And we're going to start in verse 22. I'm reading from the New International 84 version.
It says 32, Genesis 32.
Genesis 32. All right, so like was very aptly pointed out by Chuck, who totally hijacked this whole part of my message. Names in the Bible were given for a lot of different reasons, but most of the time they were given because of whoever was giving the name. They really weren't given because of the being or because of the person. It was because of how somebody felt. Like Eve with Seth, who I was going to mention, but you took. Of all the people in the Bible, okay, right? Whole book full of people, right? And you picked the same one. We really do have different minds.
What's the road? How this works?
So Eve says, all right, well, with the help of the Lord, I have gotten myself a man. In other words, she was kind of giving the bird to Adam because of the whole situation. And so she really reflected in what she's talking about, that she was given something. And so Seth was what she was given, so that name reflected her feeling. It really didn't have nothing to do with him or how he was going to feel or who he was going to be, other than he was the replacement, as you very aptly said, for Abel. So we start to see that pattern. But they also sometimes reflect what was going on at the time of a birth. Like we know with Jacob and Esau, who is the one I'm going to be talking about here. And then we're going to talk about some other people, but they've got something in common. So what happened with Esau and Jacob is Jacob was the second son, was born grabbing Esau's heel. Esau was known as Esau, which meant he was red, or he had red hair, and he was ruddy. And so Jacob was the supplanter. In other words, he was the deceiver. He was the one who was trying to get what he wanted his entire life. And he actually really royally screwed over Esau, if we read the story. Whether or not that was God's plan is a whole other issue. He still screwed his brother. And when we look at the way that he lived his life, he was always trying to manipulate situations. He was always trying to connive things. He was always trying to get the best part for himself. So he wants Rachel, and then Laban deceives the deceiver by giving him the oldest daughter, Leah, and then he is so drunk. I had to censor myself there because I was going to say he was something else. He was so drunk, he didn't even know who he was with that night. That's pretty drunk. Okay? That's more than staggering down the street drunk. I mean, unless he just fell asleep and didn't do anything. But, you know, that was the way that he lived his life. And then he wanted the other one. And so then the sisters are competing their whole lives for their cousin, which makes the whole story that much creepier and weirder and gross. So Jacob is getting ready to go meet his brother that he royally screwed over. Okay? And this is what happened starting in verse 22. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. That must have been a sight. Just that opening line, 2 wives, 2 maidservants, it's like, don't you have enough, man? Okay. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Now, what I think is interesting about this story is he was still contending. He was still trying to be the dominant one. He was still trying to fight and to win and to work out whatever it was that he needed to work out within him, because that's who he was up until this point in time. And so all these years, he's had these experiences where he's trying to be in control. And he finally reaches that point where he wrestles, as far as we're concerned, and we know it was supposed to be a theophany. He was wrestling with the angel of the Lord, which was a representation of God himself. And the message is, you have wrestled and overcome. And that now your name will be changed to reflect that. Why is that significant? Because there's an awful lot of ways that we wrestle with God and we overcome. An awful lot of us go through things in our lives. Maybe we're not literally wrestling an angel out in the middle of nowhere somewhere with camels and 2 wives and maidservants and a mess, which is exactly what he had. And there ain't no joke about that. It's the truth. But what we see is that he came to a place where he struggled. All those years as the supplanter, he struggled. All those years he kept trying to have stuff that wasn't in the natural for him to have, but that he was going to become the founder of this nation. That was then going to spend all those years wrestling with God, and a lot of times not overcoming. Through idolatry, through war, through famine, through all the crap that they all did, they reached the point where they wrestled and they struggled. And he, turning that tide, taught about overcoming. Jacob said, "Please tell me your name," still trying to be in control. But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him. In other words, it don't matter what my name is. I just told you you got a new name and you want to know what mine is. Why didn't he ask when they started? And then Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." And so then the sun rose, and then he was limping on account of his hip. And then there's a detail in there that's not that important. But what comes to mind is that he was given an identity that became not who he was. He might have started out being that way, but God wanted him to move and be something else and wanted to take him to a different place. So now let's go to another passage that's kind of a different backdrop, but a very similar consistency, I guess we could say, in naming, is Daniel. And let's go to Daniel 1. This is another instance where people's names were changed. And in this instance, they weren't changed by God, but God showed them something of himself in their changes. So, in other words, they were changed for a purpose, just like Jacob's name was changed for a purpose. Starting in verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Joachim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Joachim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Okay, so, biblical geography students, what are they talking about here?
The Babylonian conquest of Israel.
Correct. And what do we remember about that?
They weren't the ones who took over the Greeks, were they?
No. They were before the Greeks. Y'all tell me you did your seminary homework last night, okay?
Just 1/3 of it.
Right.
Just 1/3 of
I
it.
didn't talk about Babylon.
Oh, you didn't talk about that one. Okay.
No.
So it was one of the empires that rose, didn't really rise for very long, and then fell.
They
Remember-
conquered Assyria.
Yes. And they were trying to do something that was already existed. They were trying to revive something within history. So these different things that were going on are important because this is an instance where names got changed for a totally different reason. It wasn't necessarily because they wanted to be, but God still had something for them in the name change, even though it might not have been what they expected. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's what I'm calling my next dog. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael, which means Michael, Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. So they're in these situations where they're in occupation and they're dealing with conflict. They're dealing with people trying to be in charge. They're dealing with people trying to come up and deceive. They're dealing with the same type of basic nature that Jacob had. And they're in this position because they're supposed to be here selected because they were perfect, because they were, as the Babylonians would have seen them, an oddity. They wanted them to be there because the Babylonians felt that they were superior to the Israelites, and so they're going to be there because they're handsome and they're perfect and they're this and they're that. Hey, we're going to make them us. And so they did everything. They changed their names. And just as we can see here, Jacob was the deceiver, became the one who contended with God. He became a foundation. Well, these three became a foundation in their government. And the names, y'all know I never use notes, but I had to look up what they were, and I don't remember them offhand. Shadrach was originally Hananiah, which meant Jehovah is gracious, became the command of Aku, or tender. So in other words, he was God, Jehovah is gracious, but in graciousness is there not tenderness. Meshach became what Abdu is, which is drawing with force. So he became who is like God, but to a certain extent doesn't the question of who is like God draw with force. And Abednego, servant of Nego, literally means shining. Azariah was literally meaning helped by God. So both names still served a purpose, and it revealed something about their ministry. Just like the name Israel revealed Jacob's destiny, it revealed his ministry. So the three young men had a destiny that was revealed in their name changes, whether it was maybe what they thought about or not. Jacob became different after he became Israel. So did these three young men. They became something deeper. They saw themselves from a different angle. They saw themselves from a different purpose. They knew where they were supposed to be. And they were so convinced, and they were so influential, that they got thrown in a fire with the conviction to say, we believe that our God will save us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down to yours. They were convinced and they were purposed for their work. So one of the major reasons why names get changed is for assignments. They get changed for ministries. They get changed because it reveals something deeper about the person and what they're supposed to be. And this is not actually something I was going to talk about, but y'all start talking about all this stuff. My middle name, the B in my middle name, is actually Brendan. And it is from when I was Catholic and I had to pick a confirmation patron, which literally means prince or highly esteemed. But Brendan was an apostle, one of the 12 apostles of Ireland. I did not know what an apostle was, but I knew that I was drawn to his work. I was drawn to what he did. I identified something with it. And in that, and it revealed now, looking back all these years later, my assignment. And the story of the 12 apostles of Ireland, they got in a boat. They went all the way to North America in the 600s, long before Columbus. We don't care about him anyway. Long before any of the others. As far as I'm concerned, Spain can have them. We ain't claiming him from Italy. Okay? All the way over there, all by themselves, without anybody else. And my last name, Marino, means sailor. So that was something that revealed my purpose. That was something that revealed what I was going to do before I even knew about any of this stuff. Name changes reflect what we do in our work. They reflect where God is taking us in our ministry. Whether God is going to found a nation because of us, whether God is going to found a church because of us, or whether we're going to walk through the fire because of it. Name changes show us the heart of God working in us. And you know what? You can always change a name. Everybody wants to fuss over names and what they mean and what they are and your birth name and your this and the that. You know what? Everybody's always had a nickname forever.
Yep.
Names change because assignments change. And God doesn't change because, as we've talked about here, God is change.